Welcome to Distribution Talk with Jason Bader, the show where we dive into the stories, struggles, and solutions from business owners and thought leaders in the wholesale distribution market. Hi friends, Jason here. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with Steve Deist, Chief Operating Officer of Ewing Irrigation. One of the more interesting parts of Steve's story is that he and I originally crossed paths while he was on the consulting side of the fence. As you will hear, he made a long career on the advisory side before joining the firm of one of his clients. Usually it's the other way around, but Steve has brought a wealth of insight and perspective to this multi-generation company. During our conversation, we really dive into the idea that privately held business needs to beat the drum of how great a distribution career can be. Although some companies have formalized their recruiting process, smaller entities need to get their arms around a solid value proposition they can offer to a young person. I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you do too. This episode of Distribution Talk is sponsored by InSQL Distribution Software. InSQL is a fully functional distribution-based software package, and these folks do it very well at a price point many smaller distributors can afford. Another thing I like about this company is they do it all in-house. They take on these applications and build them into the platform using state-of-the-art Microsoft technology. No third-party bolt-ons for them. This is important because when you need technical assistance, they are the single point of contact. If you're ready to step up to a fully loaded, scalable distribution package at an affordable price, look no further than InSQL Distribution Software at www.insql.com. That's INXSQL.com. Well, hey, Steve, welcome to Distribution Talk. Thank you for taking the time to be with me.
Well, it's an honor, Jason. Really happy to do this.
Well, fantastic. As you know, maybe in the beginning of Distribution Talk, we definitely like to talk about, the history, how you got involved with distribution. Did you get roped in? Did you come voluntarily? If you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about how you started in distribution.
One of the things about talking about yourself is that you have a lot of really cool people on your program, Jason, and they have some amazing stories and history, and I'm really, really boring. So I don't know that we need to, that we want to do a whole lot on the personal side, but I originally was an engineer, and as my former partner said, I'm still a recovering engineer.
Oh, there you go.
So that engineering got me into some control systems, and then that led me into software.
Okay.
And the software company that I happened to work for did supply chain software. So
okay.
we did warehouse management systems and forecasting systems and transportation management, things like that.
Oh, okay.
So that got me, so a lot of our clients, not all of them, but a lot of them were distributors. And I quickly learned that you can't be successful putting complex software in without knowing quite a bit about the business that you're taking care of. So I learned a little bit about distribution in the course of doing that software. So it went from engineering to software. And when I was in that business for about 10 years, I lost a couple of really good friends. One of them laid his motorcycle down on a freeway in Cleveland.
Oh, that's horrible.
Another one had a scuba diving accident of all things. And, I was at that point in my life where I thought I needed to maybe rethink the world a little bit and what I wanted out of it.
Yeah.
And I had met some folks. I'd met Mike Marks at Indian River, and at the time he had another partner named Don Gibbons.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went down there to Florida and talked with them and ended up hooking up with them because it looked like it was a lot of fun. And they did strategy and M&A work and things like that. And I thought, it's time for me to start really feeling like I'm getting something out of my life. So that led me into the consulting gig for almost 20 years. That, of course, led to various connections and contacts, and ended up at Ewing Irrigation, and Doug York was kind enough to, first of all, give me a job, right? And then
sure.
Let me into his executive suite. So now I'm been the COO there for actually getting on to my fourth year now.
It's funny. After 20 years of consulting, I consider myself unemployable. So I just don't, so I look at that and I'm thinking, how do you make that transition? I just don't know how, really, for being that long.
No, it is a very different world. And there's a lot of things you don't learn, as a consultant because you come in and come out. But one of the things that
Sure.
you do learn is that nothing gets done unless people want to do it. And you can have the line authority, and you can do their performance reviews, and you can have all of that official authority in an organization, but it really doesn't mean much. And in consulting, that for a fact, Jason, when you're working with a client, the boss hires you and says, hey, we want you to go fix this, and you go talk to the people who actually do the work, and they don't know you from Adam, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So you have to figure out how to win their hearts and minds. And that, I'm not really that great at that, but I learned to be good enough. And that's a really important skill when you're in upper management. People will tell you, the farther you are removed from things, the more people can just bamboozle you and say, nod their heads up and down and tell you how smart you are. And then as soon as you're gone, they're back to whatever, right?
Yeah, I found that, my background being from distribution, starting on a forklift when I was 13 years old, that helps quite a bit. So I can speak a common language and I can talk about some of the things, the war stories. And generally that's kind of my in or my trick, working with people is just kind of sharing those common experiences.
You have to have that empathy or that common background. So that's a good idea.
Going from when you left engineering, you came into distribution, or you came in really into the software side. And what were the big things you learned about distribution? You said, that you really needed to understand that if you were actually going to, either sell software or consultant software or something like that. What were those big eye-opening moments?
No, that's a good question. I would say a couple things. First of all, distribution is very much about micro marketing. And that sounds really esoteric, but it basically means that they win the battle one customer and one relationship at a time. And they do all kinds of unique things for different markets and different customers and even different suppliers that, from 10,000 feet look kind of stupid or at least really difficult. And then as you get into the business, you realize how essential they are. So just to contrast that, when you're working in manufacturing, especially as an engineer, one of the things that manufacturers focus on is Six Sigma or lean or whatever you want to say, statistical optimization, statistical process control. And they're trying to drive variation out of it, right? I want 99.999% quality in it. Everything's, and I got to be able to forecast things, and I want to keep my inventory lean, and everything is about sort of efficiency and consistency and no mistakes. And Six Sigma, the statistical quality control stuff, is really good for manufacturing because you just want those machines to run 24/7 with no hiccups and everything's cool. It's the worst possible thing you can do in distribution because distribution is all about variability. If you engineer the variability out of the system, you go out of business because you're no longer taking care of the unique, customized needs of your customers and your suppliers. So distribution, one of the first ahas that you get from distribution is that it's all different, right? If you've seen one, you've seen one.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely.
And that's tough for an engineer, right?
Yeah,
because you want everything to be
Yeah.
linear and top down and amenable to, statistical number analysis. And later, I hope that we get to talk a little bit about, why it's a great career, because I think that feeds into it to some extent.
Absolutely.
That it's not something that you can model on a computer.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you saying that because for the longest time I've struggled with this, because I've met a lot of people who try to bring, those lean principles into distribution. And, I've thought, oh God, maybe I should really get more versed on this, or I should be, trying to bring those in. And I've always found it to be just a very ugly fit. And it's just
always flames out.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that because I was just like, man, this is one that I've looked at. I mean, it's got to be at least 15 years trying to figure out why the expectation is that we should be able to put in these types of protocols and whatnot, these types of measurement, and they just don't seem to work out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Very interesting.
Well, it's the same thing with CRM. It's the same thing with if you're really a sick person and you enjoy seeing people squirm, work with somebody in private equity, a very smart, Harvard MBA, lots of money, brilliant private equity person coming into distribution for the first time, and they blow a gasket because all their formulas and spreadsheets and everything else where they're supposed to fit everything into these certain boxes, it doesn't work in distribution, or at least it doesn't work as well. And so got to be careful. That's not to say that there aren't a lot of things that the industry does pretty badly and that we need to learn from, but you can't blindly take models from industries that have completely different economics and just force fit them in. It's probably going to fail.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I've literally spoken to, several people that were in that M&A world and, the private equity people coming in, and ultimately they have to hire a distribution person to deal with this portfolio or whatever they've purchased, because it's just, you're right, it doesn't fit the boxes and it's really hard. So that makes a lot of sense. Well, you were exposed to quite a bit of that at Indian River, correct?
Oh yeah. We did a lot of due diligence for some of the big dogs and help people sell their businesses, or did both. We did buy side and a little bit of sell side. And so there's a lot more discipline in the industry than there was when I started. A lot more science, a lot more financial discipline. So it's all been to the good. And I think the successful distributors, have taken the best bits and pieces from the investment banking playbook, right? And have applied them in distribution and doing really well.
I had a gentleman on recently who has been around, private equity quite a bit, and his company, or the president, he's the president of or CEO of, this is their third private equity partner. And I've definitely changed my opinion about that relationship over the years. Early on, especially if you're in privately held distribution, you're thinking, these guys are the evil overlords that are coming in to run your business or wreck your business for that matter. And, slash heads and do all this thing, everything for the bottom line. And what I've come to learn over several clients I've worked with that have private equity relationships is that there are some really great things that are brought in by these private equity companies. And frankly, they've pushed companies to be better than they ever thought they could be. And I thought that was just really a fascinating change for me, at least.
No, I think you're right. I think there's been a lot of improvement driven by that. I mean, at the bottom line, we should be honored that people want to take their money, people who are basically strangers who don't know us, right?
Right.
And they want to give us their money, because that's what private equity is it's private people's money. And for our industry or for a company, for a stranger to basically come up and say, I'd really like to give you $100 million. If you take that check, you're pretty naive if you don't think there's something that you're going to have to give back or give up or change, right? Because what they're basically saying is, I think that if I gave you my $100 million and we run your business a little bit differently, I can get $200 million back out of this thing in 4 years or 5 years, right? Yeah. So when you look at it from that standpoint, and the industry, it's very interesting, because I did this chart for probably been a few years ago for a presentation that I did. And it was similar to the conversation that you and I are having a little bit about the industry. And I was presenting it to the management team of an organization that I'm on the board of. And there's a lot of anxiety at that time about Amazon and about distribution industry. And it kind of feels old fashioned, and it's an aging workforce. And, what are we going to do? And I went all the way back to like the end of World War II. And I plotted the percentage of GDP that wholesale distribution represents. And I think it's like 7% or 6%, pretty high percent. Yeah. And I went through and I looked at, through the 70s when we had a lot of consolidation, a lot of manufacturers started going direct. Like if you're in flooring, all the carpet guys started going direct in the 70s and the 80s. Oh, and then the 80s.
Absolutely. That was that's a lot of consternation right there.
Oh, that was huge. People forget about that, of course.
That's true. Yeah.
Itself. Dude. And then, you had the big boxes coming in the 80s and 90s, and that was all, Home Depot's going to eat our lunch. And then you had, the dot-coms in the 2000s, and then you had Amazon. And you go through all these phases, and I plotted these phases out. The percentage of the GDP is rock solid. It is exactly what it was in 1946. Doesn't go anywhere. And the other thing that's interesting is the number of companies doesn't really go anywhere. So every time someone gets bought or rolled up and you think, distribution is consolidating. No, it ain't. Because as soon as that happens, the senior VP of sales in the company that got acquired decided that he didn't want to work for somebody else and spins off and then takes a bunch of his people with him. And 5 years later, they're a viable competitor. So the percentage of GDP and the number of wholesale distribution companies is pretty darn stable. And I think that's a function of the key value that distributors provide. There's an economic value to wholesale distribution that is independent of technology and a lot of these big market factors. And that is that you take millions of customers on one side of the fence and tens of thousands of suppliers on the other side of the fence. And when you just do that permutation and you say, if millions of customers want to buy from tens of thousands of suppliers, I can't do that math in my head, Jason. I'm too old. That's gazillion.
Neither can I. Neither can I. Yeah.
So it's so the number of permutation is incredible, and people simply don't have the time or energy to independently research, find, set up an account, place orders, receive product, consolidate, all those things that we think of as being kind of just sort of trivial blocking and tackling transaction management. When you do the math, by having a distributor as the single point, If you have 1,000 customers on one side and 1,000 suppliers on the other side, if all of those two wanted to talk to each other, there would be 1 million different interactions required.
Right.
But when the distributor's in the middle, it's 2,000, right? So that's the math that makes distribution work, and that's not going to change. And we can even be less efficient, even if we're only 10% as efficient as the suppliers and the customers would be going direct. We still win the game because there's so much fewer transactions because we are that hub.
Right. Definitely fascinating. And you're definitely showing your former engineering self right there in that presentation.
So I'm not sure how we got to that topic. I probably went down a total rat hole for you.
No, that's great. No, actually, it is fascinating because, I think that some people, they do get really panicked when consolidation is occurring. And, there is a panic. And especially, and honestly, who sometimes it's association execs that flame that a little bit. They're the ones that panic. They're talking about consolidation in their association. And I think they do need to stop for a sobering moment and say that, no, distribution tends to sprout offspring. People will jump off and say, I think I can do it a better way. And it's been that way for decades and decades and decades. And don't panic. I think that's the big message. Just don't panic when that happens. If I could, one thing that you started to mention, and then you just kind of brought it up with that aging workforce. Let's talk for a minute about distribution as a career and how we actually talk about this to people that are either coming out of school or, maybe coming out of military service or some other out of sports. For me, I just happened to be, watching some people coming out of professional sports and looking for opportunities or something like that. How do we raise interest in distribution as a career?
It's a great question. And it's a vital question too, because I do think that the future of business is all about employees, right? You and I, Jason, grew up in a time of, I won't say surplus workers, but it was certainly a time when labor was kind of a buyer's market, right? There was high unemployment in the 70s and the 80s. And even in the 90s, it was difficult for people coming out of school to get great jobs.
Right.
We're on the flip side of that, right? All of us old people are leaving. There's been a baby bust. There's not as many new kids. The economy's still growing, and there's just less labor, and they're pickier, and they can afford to be pickier because we're going from a labor surplus to a labor shortage. And so the winners and losers in the future are going to be based on the talent that you can attract, right? I mean, there's really almost nothing else anymore. We're not railroads that have this huge investment in tracks that we can just milk, right? Everything is, there's, the physical property that used to be the main driver of the economic performance has now been supplanted by intellectual property that lives between the two ears of your employees. So finding and getting and keeping and developing and getting the passion, right, of the people that work for you is pretty much all there is. So your question is really important. How do we do that? Personally, I don't think that we emphasize the world distribution. I mean, I love the NAW. My boss, Doug, was the president of NAW last year, and it's a great organization and do a lot of things. But I don't think the answer for us is to say there's this world of distribution that people should get excited about. I think that's a little naive.
For sure.
And even within distribution, one of the problems with this industry is that the person working for McKesson, this huge multi-billion-dollar public company selling to hospitals, and the person who works for the local Jansan distributor with one store selling to, cleaning services, they don't think they're in the same industry, and they're not, right? One is in the med, drug, healthcare world. So when we try to put those together and call that distribution, not only that confuses people, first of all, because they don't even know what that means, and it certainly doesn't sound very exciting, right? So I think the labor, the talent battle is one company or one vertical at a time. I'd like to try to paint kind of a picture, a path, a connection, connect the dots. So most companies that people know about are B2C companies, right? One of the reasons people don't know about distributors, no one's ever heard of them because they, as a consumer, don't ever interact with them, right? They might see a U.S. food service truck, but they go and shop at, Kroger, right? Or they eat
they would not be customers of that B2B company.
Exactly. So most kids, they get out of college and they know about these big companies, big software companies, Amazon, Google, big consumer products companies. I could go work for, I don't know, McDonald's or Tesla or General Motors. That's when they think of the economy and my employers, that's what's in their mind.
It's always in a B2C frame. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Let's talk about working for Tesla. Sounds pretty exciting, right? I mean,
sure.
High-end, newish company, growing fast, cool cars, right? I immediately tell my buddies, hey, I'm working for Tesla. It sounds great.
Oh, I have friends that do that right now. They just think they're the greatest thing in the world. Yeah.
I had an Uber on a Model 3 the other day. But
you did? Oh, okay.
Yeah. But when you're in that B2C world, okay, and you think of your customers, right? Because ultimately, business is in business to take care of their customers, right? That's how they survive. What are you doing for your customers when you're Tesla? Well, you're giving them a cool car. That's great. Maybe you could make the case that you're saving or improving the environment, although that's not always true because a lot of times the electricity that you plugged into your car is coming from a coal plant in West Virginia.
Yeah.
So you're moving the pollution, not necessarily eliminating it. But again, in general, it's probably, better. So you can string that story together. But when you say, what are you doing for your customers? Well, basically what I'm doing is I'm giving them a replacement for the Hyundai that they were driving. And it's probably a little nicer, a little cooler. It gets them to and from work. And as far as I'm concerned, once they've handed over their money and they've got my Tesla, I don't really have an interest in them for the next 5 years till they're ready to buy a new one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I care about them to the extent that I'm helping them out enough that they want to buy my car.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
But it's a transaction. And there might be some companies, like maybe you could say, well, I work for a retailer and I have a relationship with them because they like my brand. And so they come back and I make them feel better. So I need to know a little more about them because I want them to come back to my store all the time, right? So I need to know what kind of fashion they like or whatever. So,
or like a Procter & Gamble for something like that, that it's a consumed product. So you're going to see it more and more. Whereas, the Tesla example, it's a much greater cycle, longer.
But even Procter & Gamble, I like Tide, and I like Tide on Facebook. I don't know what it is, but even that is transactional because if I'm selling Tide to customers, I mean, I care about what they do for their laundry, I guess. But I mean, it really is, that's as far as it goes. Okay. That's B2C because in B2C, your relationship with your customer is fundamentally transactional. And if, the next day they decide they want to use, OxyClean instead of Tide, well, there's a million other people and I'll just sell it them.
Yeah.
In distribution or in B2B, our mission is so much more vital to people because we're selling to businesses. And what do businesses need to do? They need to grow and make profit to survive. We're selling to people whose business is to keep other people employed. And if you think about how much more important that is than selling Tide or a Model 3 or some consumer bauble, right? So at Ewing, we sell to landscape contractors. These people are the salt of the earth, right? A lot of them are immigrants, first or second generation immigrants who work their rings off just to get here for the privilege of working their rings off for the rest of us to save water and make our lawns beautiful and make the world a greener, happier, better place. These people work so hard. And there's a crew. And everybody on that crew that has to buy their product from Ewing Irrigation has a family that they're trying to feed and clothe and house. They got kids they're trying to scrape so these kids can go to college, often the first one in their family to do that. They need to pay for their health care and all these other things. And that's what that landscape contractor is doing. And at Ewing, I don't care about selling them this rotor or this bag of fertilizer this month. I mean, I want to do that. But ultimately, I win at Ewing by making my customers successful so they grow and I grow with them. And that ain't a transaction this week or this month or this year. That's a long-term career relationship that we have where we are trying to help them do exactly what they want to do, which is be successful business people and feed and clothe and support all their employees. And that mission is just so much more noble in my mind than I want to sell them a car.
Well, then I think that noble mission, that is a very attractive reason to look at a distribution company in the eyes of these younger two generations, not only the millennials, but then getting into this next generation after that. Many different names for that group. But, one of the key factors there is collaboration and really, yeah, exactly. The why, the purpose. What is the why? The Simon Sinek thing. But I think that is an incredibly attractive piece when you are recruiting. It's got to be part of that value proposition that you are putting out to the candidates, that this is who we are and this is how we contribute to the greater good or the greater world. If they were pitching to Gen Xers like myself, we're cynical. We don't really care about others. So
Right.
I'm not a great candidate for that pitch, but the next generations are. And I think it's a great point, Steve. Absolutely.
Well, we can offer that mission, that meaning, that satisfaction, that long-term relationship, and that's something that you get from being in the B2B space. So I think that's one part of it. And then the other part is just the opportunity. Distributors tend to be very lean, and you can look at that and say, wow, that's potentially a negative, right? Because we don't have a lot of money. We don't splash out on computer software and really lavish corporate headquarters and some of the things that you might get at another employer. And so you could look at that in one phase and say that, oh God, do I really want to work for a penny pinching, low margin business? And so,
very low net at the end of the day. And sure.
Yeah. Sounds a little, but like everything, there's two sides to that coin, right? The flip side of that is that distributors don't have, you work for a $100 million distributor and they don't have 14 layers of management. Right? They don't have in their procurement department, their forecast department, they got 3 people.
Right.
And so if you are interested in growing and developing and moving up quickly in an organization based on your credentials or based on your talents, instead of waiting your turn or trying to, map it all out politically and that kind of stuff, or, hey, I got to go get a PhD in chemistry before I can become the manager of the R&D group here at Monsanto or whatever it is. Some huge. Right. So if you go into distribution, because it is lean and because there aren't a huge number of people vying for all these positions and because there isn't this super specialization that you get in large organizations. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you go work for Tesla, do you think that you're going to be a regional manager? You're probably going to be the guy in charge of the rear light brake lamp lens or something. I don't know, or one marketing campaign in upstate New York or something. I mean, you're going to be in this narrow, small little slot in a massive corporation. And in wholesale distribution, you can be a 23-year-old and become a branch manager, and you can be a 28-year-old and become a regional manager. And you can be a 35-year-old and be a senior executive that's looking at the whole company. And that is the flip side of that lean staffing model. And you talked about the current generation. There's 2 things that I've experienced with kids now, and I'm allowed to call them kids because I'm old.
As am I, yes.
The big difference with these kids and the people that are even 10 years older, the folks in their 20s versus the 30s, these kids want 2 things. Like you said earlier, they want meaning in their life. They want their job to matter and to feel like they have a reason, their purpose in their job. The other thing they want is they want challenge. Mm-hmm. These kids, man, you come in and say, hey, there's this whole new project that you don't know anything about. You want to do it? And they're like, yeah, sure. Why not? Right? The previous generation, whoa, I'm not sure about that. That sounds really hard. That sounds like a lot of work. That sounds risky. Not sure. These kids want a challenge. Bring it on. They want to grow as fast as you can feed them. They don't look at their lives as constrained. They don't think there's any reason why they shouldn't be running the company right now.
Right.
So if we can offer them that meaning and we can offer them a lot of headroom, a lot of growth, then I think we can be very attractive.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. Often people have complained or criticized these generations, because they will change companies or change jobs quickly. And it's not because they want to change the shirt. They don't really relish the idea of jumping to another company. It's they ran out of challenges. And I think you're absolutely dead on. They ran out of the challenges. And if you want to retain this type of person in your organization, keep them fed. Just what you said, you got to keep feeding them. They'll get bored easily, that if you cannot put challenge in front of them, you got to do that. Yeah. So I guess the big question though, Steve, is how do we weave that in? Those of us from an older generation, an older vintage here, how do we weave that into that pitch or that value proposition? Or, how do we put together programs that will attract that type of candidate?
Yeah, it's not easy because the first thing you got to do is kind of be heard through the noise, right? And there's all kinds of stuff going out there. Well, I don't know that I have a real simple answer, but the first step is to be a little more proud and to be a little more confident and to feel like you can go get somebody who graduated from the Ivy League and give them a value proposition that's going to appeal to them and not be shy about the things that we offer. And the other thing that you can obviously do is you can have people already in your organization that are examples of exactly what you're talking about, that can speak their language. You mentioned that authenticity piece. And I think that's something that we can use, right? We can sell. We've got at Ewing, going back to our company, we have a profit sharing plan that is very, very lucrative. And we have people who are, have worked their entire lives at the mid-level of the company. We're not talking about senior executives or even managers in many cases. We're talking about people who, are dealing with a customer day in and day out on the front lines who retire, as millionaires because of the profit sharing plan, because we are a stable company and a fairly profitable company. And when they stick with us for the long term. So if we can offer that stability at the same time as giving people that opportunity, then I think that's a pretty amazing story. But I think we tend to be a little shy and not willing to put our employee value proposition out there and be proud of it and kind of talk it up. So I think that's the first piece. And then the other obvious thing that people do in this new world is that the affiliation is really, really important, right? So the first place that you go to define, where to work or what the possibilities are people
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's the first step. And then the second step is the social media of the people right? That's the other link, is that these days an influencer or someone in your circle has much more impact on the decisions you make than mass media did, right? So in the days going back again a generation ago, most people got their news from mass media. Most people consumed their internet sources from mass media. Mm-hmm. And today it's much more narrowcast. So what we need to do is make sure that we've got our employees heavily involved in social media and heavily involved with their friends and family. And we basically need to build those networks out and have people know us through that kind of micro marketing that is really authentic. And if you do it right, it's pretty low cost. It's certainly lower cost than putting a bunch of money in LinkedIn or Indeed or something like that.
Yeah, no, I've definitely, it's so interesting. That has come up more and more this last 6 months than it has in my entire career. That the importance and the use of social marketing, search engine marketing, that type of thing, and really learning how to target properly. I mean, I think that's it's fascinating, for someone, again, who was never that close to that side of the world. And now you start to see those possibilities. It is fascinating, I think.
Yeah. I love it when I hear people say, well, how do I compete against Amazon when they have this incredible budget, right? They put so much money into technology and we can't possibly compete. And my answer to them is that there's no industry where costs are falling faster than in technology. And the things that only the biggest massive corporation could do 10 years ago is now almost free.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're really worried about, so technology is one of those things where, you talked about social engagement, social media. I mean, the tools to do that now are so much better and easier and simpler. And you don't need to have a IT degree Google has analytics that our marketing people can use that. They don't need any technologists to help them with that.
Very true. Oh, yeah.
So I think that's the cost to entry there are falling and shame on us if we don't take advantage of that.
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that I've seen in the last few years is kind of an emergence of companies making a formal program to attract people from distribution schools, for example, like A&M or Purdue or other ones around the country. I think it's kind of neat how they've really decided. It's almost that, okay, now we're starting to get proud of what we do because I think we start to recognize who we are. But I'm only seeing really large companies or larger companies over 100 million in revenue or greater than that, starting to formalize these efforts. And I guess, how does the smaller entity, start doing that as well?
I would say, first of all, Jason, I think we're limiting our opportunities by focusing on wholesale distribution programs.
Yeah,
I love those programs, and I think it's great. And I'm so happy. Barry Lawrence has done a magnificent job at A&M.
Sure.
Of creating a buzz and level of interest. And the fact that there's a 17-year-old out there who says, I'm going to college and my major is going to be distribution, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's priceless. But I do think we are maybe narrowing our search a little bit. There are people in all walks of life. There are IT people, and there are accountants, and there are business school people, and there are engineers and people from all areas and all schools that I think could be a really good fit for us. And the recruiting, we talked earlier about how distribution is different. Well, recruiting is one of those things that's different because big schools and big distributors, billion-dollar distributors like you described, they recruit on a functional basis. You know what? We need some HR people. We need some forecasting people. We need some customer service people. And they think of that kind of functional requirement. And where do you go to get inside sales management, right? And then that leads you down the path of, well, there's a distribution school that produces people that understand these things. But if you step back and you say, look, what we need is people that can feel passionate about our business, that have the capacity to develop and grow and move up through our organization, and that are going to be a good fit culturally for us, then that widens the net radically. And one of the easiest things to do is don't worry about the majors and those things. Go to the local schools that you've got and go to trade schools. The other thing that I think is underutilized is we don't do enough recruiting in high schools.
Right.
There's still a lot of people that don't go to college in this country, or don't go to traditional right after I'm done with high school 4 years. They might take them 10 years of night school.
Right.
And those are great candidates for us. Those are great candidates. I'll tell you, there's a little bit tangential, but a really interesting story. So there's another company. I'm on the board of a plumbing supply house. And so obviously they sell to plumbers, to contractors, and they have a trip where they take, every 18 months or so, they take their biggest customers on a fairly exotic trip, which is really cool. And so the CEO there gets to have great conversations with his customers on these trips. And he's with one guy, I think he's in his 30s, and he's a plumber, and he never went to college.
Yep.
He grew up in Southern California, and he basically took over his dad's business. And, he said, when I was starting in plumbing, I thought it was the worst thing. I thought it was horrible. I'm seeing my friends on the weekends, and they're going to these high name colleges, and they're talking about these great careers that they're going to have, and I'm feeling kind of inferior. And they ask me what I'm doing. Oh, I'm helping my dad, with his plumbing thing, right? And he's like, I hated it. I hated it every single day. I didn't want to go to work. Didn't think it was the future. And I didn't really put any thought into what I was going to do next. It was just what I was at now. And I just never saw this as my future. And he said, as I stayed in the business for a while and I got more familiar with it, and I got a little more comfortable, and I got past that pride issue. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I started to realize this is like the coolest job in the world. It's like I get to run my own business. I'm making way more money than all these friends of mine that went to these expensive schools, and got communication degrees and can't find a decent job.
Right.
I get to set my own hours. I get to take vacation whenever I want. I get the complete freedom, and I get to deal with customers and decide what kind of business I want, what kind of business I don't want. I'm not stuck in an office every day. And by the time he's in his mid-30s, he's like, this is the smartest thing I ever did.
Yeah, so absolutely. Cool. Oh, yeah.
And I think we can offer some things. So
I agree with you, Steve. I think that, that's another thing that you're right. There's a lot of kids that, coming out of high school and really questioning the, going into this massive debt at a 4-year degree. And, then they're going to be going into, an entry-level job. And I mean, I have, relatives that still owe on their college degrees, and they're in their 40s. They still owe that college debt. And you ask yourself, that there are kids that, can come into our businesses and at, as you said, 23, put in a position of responsibility, at 28, even greater responsibilities, or something to that degree. That is fascinating. And again, that's the story that's not being told.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's the story that's not being told.
Yeah. And I think, again, it goes back to, all right, how do we reach that guidance counselor, for example, in a high school? how do you reach them and say, hey, we might have a pretty good opportunity for those kids who are questioning whether, or maybe they're not sure if they need to go to a junior college or something like that. We might have a pretty good opportunity for them here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. I think you could probably just do recruiting in high schools. And, the other angle, Jason, that I was just thinking about is we have in distribution, we are a rainbow, right?
Absolutely. You bet.
We have everybody. And our customers, again, going back to the fact that we take care of businesses, so that our customers are businesses that are in business to grow and feed their employees. And if you look at, the trades, there are a lot of small businesses and a lot of minorities that, are in that business. And kids in high school, when you're in high school and you're in a high school where, let's say 90% of the rest of the kids in that school, look like you, and they're not white. They're not, the typical white middle Americans. And you're going to listen to somebody that, has a similar background to you and maybe somebody that looks like you. And if that person can come in there and say, hey, this is a real path, you can do this. And the employer pays for your college. You take part-time school, and in 5 years or 10 years, you got a degree and you got your middle management making good money, and paint that picture. So I think there are a lot of opportunities if we're just willing to sell.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. And that's something that, I would definitely challenge all of the distributors, not only, that we've worked with in the past, some of them being larger entities, but, the smaller entities and, some of the entrepreneurs that I know listen to this show is, step back and realize that you've got something really fascinating to sell. You've got a great story to tell. And now it's time to get out there and do it. Don't just let them swim up to the boat, and don't let social media be the only way to do it. That, go out and get your selling shoes on, because you've got something great to sell. And if you want to really open that company up and diversify that company and, bring in some people who, really hard chargers, you want a challenge, you got to get back and start selling again. You got to sell to people.
Absolutely.
Well, Steve, I truly appreciate your time. Before I let you go, any last minute thoughts for, that maybe that newer entrepreneur, how they can really look at their company and say, I want to grow this thing and find people who are willing to jump on that mission with me.
For me, the key for the entrepreneur is to be responsive to your customers. And, in this business, we have two customers. We have the people that pay us to take our products from us. And then we have the labor customers, the people who agree to give us their valuable time in exchange for a paycheck, right? So those are our two customers in the business. And entrepreneurs win by adapting very quickly to the market, to the labor market and the customer market. So, on the customer side, as distributors, we know a lot about our customers. They need to save time. We need to make it easy for them. We need to know their business, and we need to basically help them be successful. And on the labor side, we need to think about what it is that they're buying, right? It's not about what you're selling. It's about what the customer is buying. And so if we think about what our potential employees really want out of life and what they're buying, and we just make sure that's what we're selling, then we're probably going to be successful. I would look at the two sides of that equation and try to figure out what it is that you really should be selling.
Got it. Well, again, hey, Steve, thank you so much for taking the time. I truly appreciate your thoughts on this. I think we definitely hit a chord here.
Well, good. Thank you, Jason. It was a pleasure, and hopefully we'll connect again soon.
All right. You take care. Thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, consider hitting that subscribe button. Links to sponsors, products, and services mentioned during this episode can be found in the show description area on your podcast application or at www.distributiontalk.com. Distribution Talk is edited and mixed by Andrea Klunder and Edwin Ruiz at the Creative Impostor Studios. This episode was brought to you by my company, The Distribution Team. We are a consulting services firm dedicated to helping wholesale distribution clients remove barriers to profitability, generate wealth, and achieve personal goals. To learn more about how we can help your company succeed, check us out at www.thedistributionteam.com.